Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. The most sophisticated women have Judith Leiber's bags hanging from their shoulders or clutched in their hands, and at the same time, many museums are collecting or mounting her work. Jeffrey Sussman tells us in a most delicious way the life stories of two artists, Judith and her husband Gerson Leber, in the book No Mere Bagatelles. Jeffrey and Judith are my guests today. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much.
It's so nice to have you. Your book is wonderful, and it tells this great adventure of these two incredibly talented people. And your life is like a fairy tale, right?
Is it? In a way, yes. Well, you know, I grew up in Budapest in Hungary, and I learned the handbag trade because I couldn't get into, originally my parents sent me to London to go to university there, but in the summer of 1939 I came home for the summer, and the war broke out and I never went back. So I had to learn a trade.
Yeah.
Because I said when the war is over, I'm going to, with my trade, I will go somewhere and work in other countries, because Hungary was very difficult. It was a very tough country.
What was your father do? What kind of work was he doing?
Well, my father was originally worked in a bank that did, he was a director in in the commercial bank in Budapest, and he was in charge of grain, and he used to travel to the west and sell, beans and wheat to the western countries. And he worked there for many, many years, and then he decided to retire from that. And first he worked in a company that he was part of as doing just the same thing, like selling wheat and grain. And then this ended, and he decided to go into the jewelry business, and the jewelry business that he went into was one that he sold watches and gold jewelry to people in the countryside, like the notary and the mayor in little villages, and they paid on the installment plan. And this business was started by one of his brothers-in-law in Austria. And my father decided to do the same thing, and he did that from 1938 or 37 until, everything went to hell and you couldn't do anything anymore. You had to eat.
Jeffrey talks about that life while the first under siege with the Germans, and then later the Russians.
Sure.
And
yes, it was a terrible time. I mean, the Germans were really impossible. It was horrible. And we were just lucky that we survived in Budapest, because most of the Jews even from Budapest were deported.
Yes, you certainly must have been lucky.
We were very lucky because we were in a Jewish house, but we moved from that building to a Swiss protected house that a friend had an apartment in, and 26 people lived in a one bedroom, one living room apartment.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, we were like wall to wall on mattresses.
So did that teach you something, how to get along well with people or be more tolerant?
Maybe it did. I don't know.
It must have been quite an experience.
It was a terrific experience, and you know what the trouble was? That we couldn't stay there because it was very near the Danube, and the Nazis decided that they were going to empty the whole building, and they took, even though we were Swiss protected, they picked us up, and we walked from there to the ghetto, and we were in the ghetto until the Russians liberated us for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
Did you live in the basement?
No, they were empty apartments because a lot of people moved out of that area. So we moved into an empty apartment with, some of our cohorts, not all of them. Some people that were friends and that lived in the same building with us.
Incredible.
And it was a terrible time.
Yeah. And how old were you?
I was in my early 20s, like 21, 22,
amazing?
23, something like that.
So you went from that
From that,
to now what you have.
from that, we, you know, when Gus and I came to New York, well, he was a small town boy, and he started painting in Budapest because he didn't, you know, as a kid, he said he could never afford to go to an art school. So he just abandoned the idea. And when he came to Budapest and we became friends, I took him to the Royal Academy, even though there was no Royal anymore. But this was still called the Royal Academy, which was an art school on András út. And we went there together, and Gus passed the exam that they gave him with flying colors, but he couldn't speak Hungarian at the time, and it was very difficult for him. But there was a very nice young man who was also a student there, whose father was a doctor, and he lived with his parents, and he had a studio in his apartment. And Gus used to go there, and he used to work there with him. And there is a photograph of one of the pictures that this young man painted of Gus and me sitting having coffee in our apartment.
You know, you met Gus. He was a soldier. He's an American.
He was an American soldier, and I met him on the street.
On the street.
That's right.
You know what always amazed me about you, and you explained it. Well, you didn't totally explain it, but what made you want to be a handbag?
Well, you know, my mother had wonderful handbags because my dad used to go to France, and you know, my mother was born in Vienna, so she was very, very understanding of what a beautiful bag looks like and should look like. And Daddy used to bring her bags from the West, she went with him, and they bought them together.
The equivalent of Judith Leiber bags
I
today.
don't know, but
it would be if somebody.
They were very fine handbags, and she had some very good bags, and I didn't know what I was going to do, and I thought, well, it would be a good idea to go into that.
How did you learn to do this?
How did I? I went to work in a little factory, which was the owner was the head of the Handbag Guild,
that was smart.
It was one of the top places. It was a small shop, but it was very, very, very important there. And I went to work there, and I learned how to make handbags from start to finish. I did everything. I made the patterns. I made, first I learned how to make a purse, how to make a purse pattern, how to cover a mirror. You know, of course, all that is finished today. It doesn't exist anymore.
Used to get handbags with a mirror with a leather around it or something.
Judy was the only person in Hungary, the only woman in Hungary who could make a handbag from start to finish.
Yes.
And when she came to the United States, the only person in the United States who could make a handbag from start to finish.
And she was the first woman to become a member of the Guild.
That's right.
In Hungary.
Yes.
So you met Gus. Gus stayed in Budapest and studied, and then you guys left.
Well, no, he was there from the beginning of 45 until the end of 46, and we left together, you know, just before the communism came in.
Yeah. Oh, so
before the communists came in.
Right, but the war had ended.
Everybody
was afraid of the Russians, right?
Oh yes, well, because they had the Germans, which was horrible, and the Russians turned out to be just as horrible. It's the same bunch.
So you left and you came to the United States.
I came
to New York.
He brought me. Yeah, we came to the States on a bride ship, you know, because we.
A bride ship was a ship where all the brides of the
I mean, all the European brides, you know. So it was a ship it was originally a Bermuda runner, and we were on the ocean 11 days, and I was sick as a dog the whole time. I couldn't eat a thing. It was terrible. But anyway, we came here, and Gus had an aunt in the Bronx, and we stayed with her for a short time, and then we started. we went to see my mother-in-law in Titusville, Pennsylvania.
That must have been...
which was very difficult
that
for
was
me.
a culture shock, wasn't
It
it?
was a culture shock. They lived in a very tiny, terrible little house. And of course, Gus at that time already was, you know, very sophisticated.
Yeah.
He was really practically like a European. He was so knowledgeable about art and everything else. And he used to send nude sketches to his mother, who tore them up and threw them away because she said, that's horrible. How could he do that? But anyway, and he sent her a fur coat, which she never wore. She said that was horrible. How could he send her something like that? Anyway.
Well, you didn't have to live there, so that was good.
That was very good. Well, I wouldn't have lived in Titusville for anything. It's very interesting, but you know, many, many years later, we met a couple. The husband is a Protestant minister, and his wife is working in the high school in Titusville. And Gus sent them an invitation to one of his shows many, many years ago. At that time, we didn't have a museum, we didn't have any of those things yet. And this couple became great friends of ours, and they come and visit us every summer. And they're just a terrific couple. We love them.
That's
they're
so
wonderful.
good.
It's very, very nice.
So there were different kinds of people in Titusville.
Yes, there were a lot of different people, of course.
So this is what I started to say before, is that you always knew the right place to go. When you started your first job, how did you get your first job here?
Well, it was very funny because it wasn't really the first job was I went to the, first I came here, I didn't know how to do anything on an electric sewing machine, and that's what they put me on, and I couldn't do it. So I got kicked out, and I went to the National Handbag Authority, which was at that time on Fifth Avenue between 33rd and 34th Street on one of the higher floors. And I spoke to a man who was the director. His name was Berkowitz, Mr. Berkowitz. And he was a very nice man, and he told me that the handbag business is like strudel in America. They make, it's all made in different operations. It's not like in Hungary, one person made the bag from start to finish. I mean,
it's like an assembly line.
Now here it's an assembly line, but there it was, the pocketbook maker would make the pattern, and then it would be cut from, the parts would be cut, and they would be skived, and then they would do all the operations on it. Whatever part had to be turned in was done that way, or if it was a frame bag that didn't have any turning in, it was sewed up and turned inside out. So very different than in America. Here they have different people doing everything. There's a pattern maker, then there is a pocketbook maker, and a helper, and a cementer, and then there is a sewing machine operator. And they, when they start to work, I mean, the cutter cuts leather or the silk or whatever it is, and if it's leather, they have to skive it because it's too thick to work on. What does that mean? It's thinned down at the edges wherever you have to turn it over or sew it. So that's part of the work.
So Judy was unique. I mean, she was the only person in America who could do
incredible.
this, and became a star at whatever company she worked at.
But how many people looking for a position, a job someplace, would think to go to the head of the federation or the something? I mean, that's what
But it makes
amazed
sense,
me.
doesn't it?
Oh, total sense.
Yes.
Well, I didn't know.
Was it that you just didn't know anything else, so you did it?
I just went there.
Right.
And then, then I went to work for a company called Gary, which was a $5 bag, because Mr. Berkowitz has a son who was a so-called designer there, and he knew nothing. But that's how he operated. Yeah. So I worked there for a comparatively short time, and one of the sewing machine operators said to me, "Boy, you come from Europe, you made the finest stuff there. go to the union and talk to the manager, which I did. I went to Mr. Lublina, was a manager.
See,
and
another
he-
person.
That's right.
and
She always
he-
went to the
and
top.
he-
Exactly.
And he said to me, I don't believe you can do what you say you can do. I said, just send me there. So he sent me to Nettie Rosenstein, which was a top
Very
company
famous
at
woman,
the time.
yeah.
Yeah, she was the woman
So-
who invented the little black dress.
Right.
Yes.
So, Jeffrey, you be Gus in this, all right?
Okay.
Gerson is your husband, who has always been a fine painter.
Yes.
He's exhibited in museums. and-
Museums and galleries all over the
Yes.
country.
Right. And they just melded together.
They were an ideal couple, and they inspired each other. Gus's artwork often inspired Judy's
Well, it's
designs
still-
for handbags.
It still goes on, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And Judy is always very responsive to Gus and his paintings. They're very, very supportive of each
And
other.
Gus, when you later left Nettie Rosenstein and you went into business for yourself, Gus was an important person in that
Yes,
business.
of course.
He did everything. He was a
did
jack of all
everything.
trades, including delivering packages on the buses and the subways to all the department stores. He said he was the highest paid messenger in New York.
So so you decided to be on your own. By that time, designers knew your work. I mean,
No,
department
no.
stores, no?
Well, some of them did. I mean, I worked, when I worked at Rosenstein, there were quite a few of the big shots that I knew, the buyer of Neiman Marcus, the buyer of Saks,
Yeah,
the
so they're
buyer
pretty
of Bombay
important, yeah.
Teller. But of course,
And in the industry, she was very well
Yeah.
known. And don't forget that from 1953 on, every
63.
well, that's when you started the company. But from 1953 on, every first lady carried a Judith Leiber
know.
designed handbag to her husband's inauguration.
So Nettie Rosenstein sold them at first, or did they give them?
No, Nettie Rosenstein gave Mamie Eisenhower a bag.
And that's what stuck.
And I designed it. And then after that, when Mrs. Nixon became the president's wife, I made the bag for her. And at that time, I was already in my own business. And I did Mrs. Johnson. And
Kennedy?
Kennedy, I
No.
didn't know. Kennedy was. I
Who
wasn't
did her
in-
bag?
I don't know.
Maybe she didn't have a bag.
Maybe she
Pockets.
didn't. I don't know.
Did you meet these people before you designed for them, or did you just design?
No, I didn't
Yeah.
even know them. I didn't know
Yeah.
Mrs. Eisenhower,
Yeah.
but I was very lucky
Yeah.
that they let me do that.
So then when you decided to go out on your own, did you just contact the stores, or they knew
No,
that
I
you were
didn't
doing
know.
that?
Mrs. Nixon's dress was made by Adele Simpson, and I knew Adele very well, and she engineered Mrs. Nixon and Mrs. Johnson.
Uh-huh.
And then after that, I didn't, Jackie Kennedy I didn't do. We weren't in business when when she became the Mrs. President.
But they carried your bags all over the world.
Yes, and she had one of my bags too.
And you were known for the jeweled bags. Is
Yes,
that what
but
became so?
no,
But
actually
you've done everything.
I've done everything, small and large. But when we started, we didn't make jeweled bags. I started out in 1963, and we made leather bags and silk bags. And we used to make, I wanted to make little small bags, so I made a lot of comparatively small bags. And they started to take off. People loved them. They liked them. We were very happy about that. And at that time, we were already going to Italy every year. And Gus and I decided that we were going to try to make a metal bag. So we made the chatelaine, it's in the book, this one.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first metal bag, and it was when it came in, the man who made the mold, they plated them in Europe, and they plated them so badly that I had to put something on it in order to sell it, because he said he couldn't do any better, and the current wasn't good in Italy. So I put rhinestones on it. That was my first metal bag. And then then I made a second one with this same company, and then the fellow died, and we worked with a successor, you know, with his brother. They still had the company, and we worked with them for a short time. But the two guys that were doing the work for us recommended somebody who was actually originally a silversmith. And this is a very, very wonderful company outside of Florence. And they recommended him to us, and we started to go to this man, and the company is still working with him. He's an absolutely fabulous company. But the man who owned the business was deaf. He couldn't hear. And his wife used to, you know, he could lip read. And his wife used to tell him things, and he would lip read. Oh. He was incredible. And his children were with him working already when we went to them. And the children, one son was doing all the books. A daughter was doing selling along with her father. And the third brother was doing all the, you know, he did the idea of how to, we used to take a wax model over, and they made a plaster of it. And then they decided, they made that into brass. And some of them had like 7, 8, 9 models to go through till they got it done.
But a lot of people didn't realize how many components there were in it. There were over 130 components.
In making a handbag.
In a simple
in the leather
handbag.
bags.
And that had nothing to do with, you know, putting crystals on it.
Leather or silk. No, the crystal bags, you know, those that we made of crystal were not that complex.
Yeah.
I mean, we made the linings out of gold or silver kid.
Yeah.
And then
and then glued.
glued the stones on the outside. But I used to make, you know, originally I made just plain rhinestones. After this one, I made plain rhinestone covered bags, either clear or black or color. And then I decided I was going to make patterns. So the patterns, the girls had to, first they put gesso on the outside of the box in order to then put the colors on. And they made drawings on top of the box, all the colors and all the patterns that I wanted. And then another group of girls, but always one girl worked on a complete box, did the design of the, they followed the pattern that the other girls that we
put together.
And then that's how they did it, and they're still doing that. But
Did
now
Gus
they're doing it abroad, I think. No longer.
Well, we have to get to the fact that you sold the company. But did Gus participate in the designs? Do you know?
No,
never.
But he inspired some, didn't he?
No, he just was my greatest critic. But his criticism was very good. But whenever my mother loved the pattern, it was never sold. They were not good. They didn't like. People didn't like them.
That's so funny.
So Gus was the best critic.
He was a
Very
great
good.
critic.
And they became really pieces of art, right?
They are.
They're
Yes.
I mean,
They're in the Metropolitan
Right.
Museum of Art, the Smithsonian, the Corcoran Gallery. There's one in the Victoria and Albert Museum.
Oh, yeah?
Yes,
Oh, I love that. But there are also all kinds of designs. I mean,
yes, they're
Sure.
different shapes. I mean, first I used to
Deco,
make.
they're beautiful.
Well, if they were simple enough, I would make myself. I would do them out of cardboard, and we'd take that over.
Yeah.
But some of them were very complex. Like, you know, once we did animals. So I had a sculptor. I gave him an idea, and he would make up the piece in wax, and then we take the wax over to Italy, and they followed the wax. They made a gesso on top of it, and then they made it in brass. They're
And then
all
it came
made of
back here?
brass. Well, once it was finished, they sent it, and for a while, I used to have the plating done in New York, but then the people that did the boxes decided to set up a plant in their own place of plating gold or silver. And when they started doing that, first of all, the plating was much better, and it was faultless. It was perfect. So the boxes came in with the plating on top of them, whichever way we asked them to make some silver, some gold. And then we made all the linings, and then we worked on the outside.
We only have less than 2 minutes, so I'm going to have Jeffrey sort of summarize. The successful business went on and on.
Yes.
It did.
And then what made it stop?
Well, they were offered a terrific deal, and it was exactly what they were looking for.
Yeah.
So they sold it, what was it, in 1993?
In 30 years, we said it was enough, because we felt that the rhinestone bags were going to be copied.
Yeah.
So we said, and
And
the
are they
leather was never sold
Yeah.
as well as the rhinestones.
So now you do you consult with a company that makes them?
No, I don't.
you don't.
I don't consult.
And you
with them
exercise and
anymore.
you live a healthy life. Do you read a
Yes,
lot?
we do. I read a great deal.
Yeah.
A lot of,
And
as
your
my husband says, I read a lot of junk. I love
She's a compulsive
mysteries.
book buyer.
and
Every week she's in a
That's good.
bookstore buying a bag of
Good.
books.
Does and the husband paints?
Paints and
And
sculpts.
and they have these wonderful gardens.
They have
Oh,
7
yes.
acres of gardens,
You
and
have to
each
come out and
Yes,
see.
I'd love
Come with
to.
your husband.
I would. I love
We'll
it.
put you up
each
too.
acre
Okay.
each acre is a different style garden. They're absolutely gorgeous.
So you must have had a wonderful time talking to these two astonishing people.
Well, as you could have heard, this went on for over a year.
Yeah.
Every weekend, I interviewed Judy and Gus,
Yeah.
and the stories were just terrific.
Yeah.
And my
And I-
sister would be the helper.
Yes,
Your
and
sister was there
she
too.
would.
Did your whole family come over to America eventually?
Yes, you know, my parents had to go to Israel because you couldn't go from Hungary in the 40s. You couldn't go to America. They wouldn't let you go out to America.
so you had to
there.
go
So
this way.
they went to Israel.
Yeah.
They were there for 6 months, and then they came here in 1950.
So we've come to the end of this program. Jeffrey's written the story that you've told a lot of, but there's much more in this book, and
Yes,
people
there
should look
is.
for. Where can they get it?
they can get it at, it'll be available soon on Amazon.com,
Good.
at the Judith Leiber stores, at Bergdorf Goodman, at Neiman Marcus, and if anyone goes out to the Hamptons, it's in Guildhall and in Bookhampton there, and it's soon going to be in the Metropolitan Museum of Art.
I have other questions to ask you. I just wish we hadn't come to an end so quickly. So thank you so much, and I loved your
You're
stories,
very
and I
welcome.
even own a Judith Leiber bag, so I'm
glad
very
you
proud
do.
of it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for bringing this lovely
My
story
pleasure.
to us. Is there any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore? Please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.